Welcome back to Underground Genius. Thank you for sticking with me. Just had to take a little short break. I'm just gonna get straight back into it, just because, like I said, this episode is running a little bit long, and I'm hoping that you're either playing this on your commute, you're using this, you're playing this while you're cleaning or doing something to help you pass the time. I'm not gonna read the entire thing. I'll just read the important parts, and even the important parts, I kind of want to paraphrase. So Irv said that he met Hove in '87, and he was in London with Jaz-O, and of course we know Hove was in London in the late '80s. You remember his Drug Dealers Anonymous verse, 89 in London, pull a Benz up. Type it in, Google is it, you already know the shit. So while Jaz was making his album, Hove and Irv, they ran around London together, and Irv, he kind of sensed that Jay-Z was different. And a year later, in 1988, that's when he met DMX, and he met some other people who informed him that they were starting Rough Riders, and he convinced one of the individuals going by the name of Wah to buy him a drum machine so that Irv himself can produce records for DMX. And he says the first time he heard X rhyme, it was something crazy, his energy and his rawness. He knew that he was different and special. Years later in '93, that's when Irv would meet Ja Rule, and they instantly became like brothers. He met him through a gentleman by the name of Chris Black. And Irv and Ja, they were inseparable at a time. They would always go everywhere. That's when Irv would take Ja to Yonkers to link with X and the Rough Riders, and to link with Jay whenever they had the opportunity to. Irv later talked about Jay-Z bringing Dame Dash and Biggs to the studio, and let Irv know that those were his partners at Rockefeller, and that he was asked to help them in '95, around the time Reasonable Doubt was made. So Irv says he brought Ain't No Nigga to Funk Flex, and he told Flex to basically give this record the green light, to basically play it on the show, and basically introduce Rockefeller to the world, and saying like, yo, this is their time right now. And the rest is history, as he calls it. So let's stay in 1995. So this is years after, Irv was playing a support role. He managed to get the trio DMX, Hove, and Ja on the Mike Geronimo record, Time to Build. And keep in mind, this was before each one of those artists released their debut project. So Time to Build came out. I'll leave it to you if you've heard the record, or if you're going to listen to the record, I'll leave it to you to decide who had the best verse. I forgot who I believe. I think it was, matter of fact, I'm not even going to say that. So over the years, they would appear alongside each other on several different records, but all three of them would only appear on the same song 4 times as far as what was released to the public. So Time to Build in '95. Murdergram in 1998 for the Streets Is Watching soundtrack. This is the first time that they were credited as Murder Inc., so that's very important in their timeline. It's Murder, which appeared on Ja Rule's debut project, Veni Vedi Vecchi, in 1999. And that album, I'll pause right there. That album came out in June of '99. And it came out in the same, more or less the same time as that iconic XXL cover story that they did for Murder Inc. And of course, the last unreleased record, If It's On, It's On, If It's On, It's On, featuring Ja's old group Cash Money Click. That record was recorded around '95 and '96. That was produced by Irv. Other standout records amongst the trio include Jay-Z's Money Cash Hoes, Can I Get A, which were both on Volume 2, and Mike Geronimo's Usual Suspects, which featured DMX and Ja Rule. What was interesting about this team was that they joined forces, tentatively or otherwise, before each of their careers took off. Especially when we look at how impactful and successful each of the rappers would turn out to be. So in 98 alone, Hov's Volume 2 became his first #1 record, his most commercially successful album at that time, and a top 10 highest first week seller of that year. DMX would also achieve that same feat twice in that same year, which I mentioned before. And of course, Ja ain't no slouch. His first 3 solo projects went to achieve platinum and multi-platinum status. And his second and third projects debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts. So to have this megastar level, like these megastar level acts coming together to form a group, that's kind of I guess that's an example of where the term supergroup comes from. And like I said before, man, they could have been one of the biggest groups in hip hop history. So in that post, he also talked about he carved a pocket for the lady friendly / raw street nigga, and how each of those acts, and when I say that, I mean, of course, Ja Rule, and each of those acts, they were able to be successful in their own lane, which was super dope to watch. And additionally, each of these artists would spearhead a label and help put other artists on and other artists in positions of power, which is also really good. That's just like creating those opportunities for not only rappers, but then also managers, A&Rs, producers, future executives, things like that. Like it's super dope to see that those three would go on to lead these entities. So shout out to all three of them, all four of them when you count Irv. When you have artists that are as successful as all three of them, you're bound to have the possibility of an ego clash. Obviously, there was never a proper Murder Inc. album, and the story is that there was a rocky relationship between Jay-Z and DMX. In their earlier years, they would participate in rap battles, and DMX was always used to winning over the crowd until his bout with Jay-Z, and that was the first time X didn't have a definitive win. It's possibly a loss. It was definitely a debatable, 2-1 debatable. If you're a battle rap fan, you're going to catch that. 2-1 either way. Irv told MTV in 2011, quote, X hated Jay because it was the one battle that he said it wasn't absolutely sure in everyone's mind that he won. Later on, Ja Rule echoed that same sentiment, saying, quote, we couldn't get X and Jay in the same room from long ago, their story battle on the pool table, guns out and all of that. We tried to deliver that album. It was a situation where egos all just played a part in its demise. Egos all just played a part in its demise. Egos and demise. Whether or not that's a running theme with all of these groups, that's yet to come. But that's something to definitely keep in mind. But once again, shout out to all three of those gentlemen. They actually, I wouldn't necessarily call it a reunion in the traditional music sense, but they appeared backstage. I believe it was Jay-Z show. They appeared backstage and they all took a picture together. So it's no beef. There's no long-standing beef. So we can be thankful for that. All right. So this next group can be split up into 3 different groups, which is how I'm going to do it. For these groups, I kind of wanted to get the representation of the peak mixtape era, specifically for New York. You know, at that time, Whoo Kid, Funk Flex, K-Slay, there were many others who are among the mixtape DJ or just even the hip-hop DJ elites. And you can't bring up this era without bringing up DJ Clue. And, of course, his infamous Desert Storm label. So we'll start here. We'll start at Desert Storm and we'll see where it goes. So Clue himself, his contributions to hip-hop culture, they were solidified with his street mixtape series. Clue tapes, you know, just anybody at that time, even now, Clue tapes, Clue tape era. That's just a thing that's just embedded in the DNA of hip hop, especially the DNA of New York music. So you can think of a Clue tape as like a modern day playlist on a streaming platform. Take your favorite streaming platform of choice, and then think of like the main ones that get pushed to the forefront. You know, that was basically what a Clue tape was before we had that access. For those who have trouble, or for those who want to discover new music, but they don't necessarily know how to, right now a playlist is one of the best places to start. You know, so Clue, who would of course solidify his status as an expert curator, he would compile several different songs from artists who were buzzing in the streets. And the only way to hear what was going on, what was hot, was to be out. Like, you had to be outside. You had to link with the people who are in the know, or you had to be in the know yourself. So there's a great Revolt article that gives the history of DJ Clue. So he became the first non-rapping DJ to sign to a record label in '98. And of course, that produced his Rockefeller debut, The Professional. And the dichotomy between a rapper and a DJ evolved thanks in large part to DJ Clue, because his rapport with artists were crucial to his success, to The Professional's success and long-lasting impact. And his ability to secure verses from Hove, Ja Rule, Nas, DMX, Mobb Deep, and others who were blazing hot at that time. That was something that was replicated many times over in the years to come. Even now, it's still done. Of course, there's one name that comes to mind. I'm not gonna say it, but I'm pretty sure you figured it out. So the Professional and his sequel, The Professional 2, they went platinum and gold respectively. And they contain phenomenal records such as the Rough Riders Anthem remix with DMX, Jadakiss, Styles, Eve, and Dragon. Fantastic Four Part 2 with the Lox, Nature, Fabulous, and Cameron. Even on that song, I struggled to figure out who had the best verse, but I'm always stuck between Cam, Fab, and Jada. Or like Jay-Z's classic freestyle over the Who Shot Ya beat. That's essentially what he did. He basically made himself a mainstay DJ, a mainstay person of interest in the hip-hop culture at that time. Desert Storm was his base of operations, and it housed an immense group of talent. Joe Budden was on Desert Storm, Stack Bundles, rest in peace, Fabulous, Paul Kane, and the A-Team, Hitchcock and Ransom. And much like the albums, Desert Storm was an interesting collective of tri-state area MCs, and they were super competitive and super bar heavy. And they functioned more like a true indie, like a true label rather than a group, like a traditional group. In the years that followed, of course, each of the artists went their separate ways, and they all got, they all got their own respective label deals. Stack Bundles, who led Riot Squad, he actually went to join Jim Jones with Bird Gang. And unfortunately in 2007, his life was cut short. Joe Budden went to Def Jam, and we all know how that turned out. Fab stayed with Clue and Desert Storm, and he released several different albums under labels such as Elektra, Def Jam, and Atlantic Records. But he's still, even to this day, he's still with Desert Storm. So we started with Desert Storm, late 90s. Let's fast forward to 2003. So in March of 2003, Fabulous, he released the now platinum Street Dreams album. Fast forward a little bit to November of the same year, he released More Street Dreams Part 2, the mixtape. And on the project's first song, DJ Clue he introduces the track's artist as Triangle Offense. I'm pretty sure for those of you familiar with basketball, Triangle Offense refers to the famous Phil Jackson strategy. So the track's artists were Fabolous, Paul Kane, who was also signed to what is it called, Desert Storm, and is Fabolous's brother, and Joe Budden. I want to use this as basically the marker for the introduction to Triangle Offense. You know, and all of them pride themselves on being, you know, top tier lyricists, bar heavy punchlines, things like that. And as I mentioned before, they were very super competitive. And they, of course, maintain a relationship even up to this day. And there were several collaborations and freestyles over the years, but there was no full-fledged project that ever came into fruition. The focus was on each member's solo careers and label situations. Of course, Budden went to go form Slaughterhouse in about, it's like 08-ish, which is a funny story in itself, but right here and right now is not the place or time to get into that. So we fast forward to the reason why I'm here and the group that kind of made me think of the other two, which is Street Family. For those of you who follow Fabolous's career, pretty sure you're familiar with Street Family. So 2006, a new record label which was founded by Fab, a tight-knit group of rappers. So Fab and Paul Kane, of course. But then you also had Red Cafe, Freck Billionaire, Broadway, who would sign as the group's first singer, and he came later into the group. So the introduction to Street Family, you can kind of look at the introduction to Street Family as this is the song "This Is Family," which was off of Fab's 07 album From Nothing to Something, and that featured, of course, Paul Kane, Freck Billionaire, Red Caffeine, Joe Budden, and Ransom. Phenomenal group of rappers. Of course, Street Family. There were several different appearances on Fabolous's mixtape series and his albums as well, but no full project from the group. Now, SF, they gained unwanted notoriety and they were portrayed as a group that engaged in criminal activity. That was their portrayal in the media. So in 2006, former NBA player Sebastian Telfair, he was outside an NYC restaurant owned by Diddy, where he was robbed for an expensive chain, among other things. Fabolous happened to be outside of the same restaurant, the same restaurant at that time, and a series of events led up to Fab getting shot that same night. And that kind of contributed to why the narrative was painted as such. Of course, there was never any real confirmation as to whether or not Fab or SF was involved. But you know, when you have these series of circumstances, people like to connect dots that may or may not have any relation to each other. Fast forward to 2008. So Plaxico Burress, which is a name that I haven't said in years. Of course, we all remember he shot himself in the leg in a nightclub in New York City, and was sentenced to 2 years because of this for an unlicensed gun charge. So the Daily News reported that Plaxico said he carried the gun as, quote, protection against a crew of stick-up kids known as the Street Family. This led to Fab name-dropping Plaxico on his Lord Knows freestyle. And he did several interviews after that kind of addressed like dry snitching. And, you know, it was a very strange time for the group. because as you're trying to establish yourself as artists, you have all of these things that may or may not be true about your group. I can see that preventing them from getting the looks that they want, from doing the things that they want when they have this negative reputation about them. In addition to that, Freck Billionaire, unfortunately, he got arrested in '08 for drug offenses, and he did about 3 years for that. And even aside from all of that, we also had to look at each member's catalog, namely Fabulous. There was a 5 year gap between Loso's Way and, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was the Young OG project. There was a gap between Fab's studio projects, but of course he released the like several mixtapes, the Soul Tape series. Fun fact: Soul originally started as an acronym for the Science of Understanding Loso. It kind of tells me that propelling the group in music may not have been on the docket. It may not have been on their list of priorities, which is fine, you know. Not every group in music has to drop a project, which is also something that I wanted to highlight with this. If they come together and create moments, that in and of itself is good enough, especially if those moments are remembered by core fans. But it would still be interesting to hear their own thoughts of the group, how it all turned out, and what it is that they were trying to do, things like that. All right, and now to get into the last group of today. This is a not necessarily a New York born group, but it's a New York based group, and you'll see what I mean. And the name of this group is Center Edge Territory. You may or may not be familiar with the group. I myself, I'll be honest, I didn't really know of this group's existence until I started doing research for this topic. And like many other esteemed hip hop groups, the story of Center Edge Territory starts with none other than Dame Dash. So years after the dissolution of the legendary New York label, Dash continued so many different business ventures, one of which being DD172. So the name DD172, it was basically a building in Tribeca, and it was comprised of, like, the name was basically his initials and the street number of the building, or his address number rather, 172 Duane Street. And it was basically a creative hub that served as a central base for so many different creative endeavors, including an on-site gallery, a magazine, America New, as well as a web design firm even, Vanguard 79. Dame, of course, he still kept his hand in music. You know, he executive produced Black Rock, which is a group, like, it was a collaborative effort between himself, the rock band, the Black Keys, and various other MCs. He also launched and housed Blue Rock Records, a very prime example of a place where people can quote link and build. You know, so before, like, the people who were on that link and build shit, like, yo, let's link and build and all that stupid shit, like, these people were actually at that, and that's not to disrespect anybody today, but we all know people who are on some, like, yo, let's link, let's build, and they ain't really about shit. Like, if we keeping it honest. But enter three artists that formed the group Center Edge Territory: Jay Electronica, Currency, and Yashim Bey, formerly known as Mos Def. And it's a very random group, a very random grouping of individuals. It seems that way because it is. They met, and they met at DD172, and almost immediately decided that they should form a group. So he recounted their, and by he I mean Currency. Currency recounted their meeting in 2009. He told MTV, Jay Electronica is from my city. He's from New Orleans. And he also said that he never met homie until he stepped foot in this building. He came to meet Mos, and Mos, I'd only known him for 24 hours prior to that. But genuine people could recognize each other. It was like, let's go, which was crazy. So within 48 hours of meeting each other, they decided to form a group. So what was the business model for that group? Quote, this is Currency as well. We got some songs. We're not going to put out an album. It's just going to be assaults just whenever we feel like it. And he basically said that they weren't even doing this for a check. It was never a money thing. It was more or less just a kind of what he calls putting the rap game in check, just kind of just realigning it and making sure people are rapping for the purpose, like for genuine reasons. In July of 2010, that was when Spit Andretti released the first installment of his Pilot Talk series. And that was his first album under the Blue Rock imprint that was, like I mentioned before, under DD172. It included a record titled The Day, which was the Center Edge Territory, which was their first and their ultimately only song released to the public that featured all three MCs. So a year later, after very little noise about the group, Currency says, Center Edge Territory, that's not over. I just tweeted that the other day. Center Edge is not dead. I told you, like I said, when the game is in turmoil, we'll release records. Right now, the game is okay. I'm not totally disappointed with the state of the game because Dom Kennedy put out some music. Kendrick Lamar is out. Big Sean is out. So it's not that bad. When the game is in a total wreck, we'll be here. But until then, we're going to chill. So a year later, producer Ski Beats, he went on to discuss, I guess, the whereabouts and the happenings of Center Edge Territory. Getting the group together right now is just a whole bunch of politics involved, and there's a whole bunch of different things. So it's hard to really get them together at that time. Jay Electronica was in London. Mos Def was Mos Def, as Ski Beats put it, and Currency was all over the place as well. It's important to have one of those cornerstones, especially in New York, being one of the central places of hip hop, of the genre. It's important to have one of those hubs available just because of the fact that collaboration produces so much great art, produces so much great content. It's really good. They're downsides, but of course, with everything, there's going to be a downside, but the benefits heavily outweigh those downsides. So, shout out. You can feel however you want to feel about Dame. Just shout out to him for at least trying to keep that essence alive with DD172. And that's all I have to say about that group. And I'm thinking about it. I don't know if I said the last group would be the last group, but I'll just do one more, and then we'll split the second half into the second episode. So another group, when you first may have heard this topic, another group that might have come to mind would be Child Rebel Soldier, CRS. If I'm to say that Murder Inc. was the group with the most star power of throughout this entire list, CRS is literally one step below. Either one step below or they're right there on the same tier. And CRS is Child Rebel Soldier. They're definitely one of the more interesting cases of all of these groups. Comprised of three multifaceted geniuses, musical geniuses, however you want to cut it. And their styles complemented each other. So of course, the group consisted of Lupe Fiasco, who was a child at that time, Kanye West, who was a rebel who's always been a rebel, and Pharrell Williams, who was a soldier. And the origin of the group, it doesn't really start with any of those members. It actually started with Radiohead frontman Tom York. So in 2006, he released his own debut album titled The Eraser. And you're probably asking, well, how does this even tie in with any of these rappers? So Lupe, around that time, he was working on a genre blending mixtape that was inspired by songs from that album, The Eraser. The titular track from the York project was among one of the songs Lupe repurposed for his own project. And he enlisted the service of Kanye West as well as a UK rapper by the name The Streets for this record. So, Kanye submitted his verse. For whatever reason, the Streets was not, he was not able to submit his own verse. So right around this time, Pharrell suggested that the three should just form a group. Lupe said Pharrell, quote, Pharrell came up with the idea, let's do a group, Child Rebel Soldiers. And Pharrell was also the one who came up with the name of the group and assigned each one of the members one of those monikers. And what Kanye decided to do was he decided to send the unfinished song to Pharrell. Pharrell decided to lay a verse down and said, yo, this is it. This is the first song right here. Let's do it. So seemingly out of nowhere in 2007, the world was introduced to CRS on Kanye West mixtape Can't Tell Me Nothing with the song Us Placers, which is basically their most famous song. They're like, if you were to talk to somebody who's familiar with Child Rebel Soldier, that's probably the first song that they're going to mention. That was the first time that they were credited as Child Rebel Soldier, Lupe, Ye, and Skateboard P. And that sent the music blogosphere into a frenzy. At that time, back when the blogs were like really prevalent, especially in hip hop, so many people were doing write-ups about it. So many people, there was so much excitement. Two of hip hop's fan favorites and a blossoming star, of course, being Lupe Fiasco, coming together as a group, it warranted all of the attention and the press that it got. Now, a problem off the bat, like I just said, two fan favorites, two people who were already established, and one who was coming into his own, who was new, who already established his power and his force and his drive. When you have that dynamic, you also have that last member, the one who is still blossoming. They're trying to establish themselves as solo artists, and Lupe was fortunate enough at that time to be among hip hop's elite musicians. But Kanye West and Pharrell, in addition to, like, let's say doing a group, they also had their respective careers to worry about in music, in fashion, and in everything in between and outside. They had their own obligations to fulfill. Kanye West with good music, Pharrell with Star Trek, Pharrell producing for other people, Kanye producing for other people. The list goes on. So, of course, getting all of their schedules to align was no easy task at all. And, of course, each rapper was on their own respective label, which could have presented, a legal nightmare and a logistical headache trying to figure out who would take credit for what or whatever the case may be. But was it really that hard to align schedules is the question. So in 2008, Kanye, via his blog, announced that the three were set to go on the Glow in the Dark tour. It was not a CRS tour, but it was Kanye's tour, but it featured Lupe Fiasco, NERD, which was Pharrell's band, Santi Gold, Nas, Rihanna, and so many other people appeared alongside that tour. So of course they etched out a time for the artists to appear alongside each other. So it probably was possible and plausible that they could sit down and create a full body of work. So later in 2018, I'm bugging, 2008, a CRS remix of the NERD song "Everybody Knows," in parentheses, all the girls standing in line for the bathroom, that came out, and that further continued the hype around the group. And they were active. And it was obvious that they were active, keeping this first generation of internet kids. And by first generation, even though the internet was out way before then, this is around the first time, like mid 2000s, when people when musicians and when hip hop was leveraging the internet and using that to further maximize their output and their reach. And that got the internet kids excited for the release of a full project. And then silence. Exactly that. Nothing for almost 2 years. No music, no press releases, nothing. In 2010, fast forward, Lupe, in passing in an interview, revealed that there were about 4 songs that were already recorded. No further developments for the group. And then later that year in 2010, during the Good Fridays, that iconic run that Kanye West had, he released the song "Don't Stop," kind of like attempting to breathe life back into CRS, and it featured all three of the rappers. This song, as well as "Everybody Knows," or "Everyone Knows," and as well as "Us Places," you can still find these records on like places like YouTube. And you can find them on the internet now. I don't know if you can necessarily find them on streaming services, but Lupe said to MTV, and he was talking about the record "Don't Stop." He says, quote, "We went on the Glow in the Dark tour, and it was just kind of like, maybe not. Let's do a record. Let's see." So "Don't Stop" is kind of one of the records from that creative process from a couple of years ago. And he added that Kanye's bars may have been updated. He said, quote, "The song is 2 years old. I think Ye verse might be a little recent, but I don't know. That song is like a song that we did in the midst of being CRS when we were actually going to put an album and really just wanted to test records and see if we should do more records like that, or should we do more records like Us Places, or more download records, up top records," he said. "We were just trying to figure out what we should do, and that was one of the experiments that was bananas." And then he said that they wanted to gauge the reaction, and and he wanted to see, because every time CRS had released a record up until that point, it got a crazy reaction. So he kind of wanted to see what this song would do, and if there's demand, then they would go forward with a full project. Again, silence for about 3 more years, until a final Lupe Fiasco tweet that it gave eager fans all the news that they ever needed about Child Rebel Soldier. A fan tagged all 3 of the rappers in a tweet, which prompted Lupe to respond, "The CRS group is canceled. Done. Not happening. Stop asking," end quote. That put an end to perhaps the most experimental, creatively ambitious group on this list. Now, recently, in August, out of nowhere, Lupe Fiasco just tweeted a picture of all 3 rappers. It was a graphic, and it just said it had the group's name above their heads. No context, no further updates, just that alone. That was it. And then, of course, when Kanye went to publish his Universal contract on Twitter, Lupe came out with he went on Instagram Live to kind of give fans further insight into what was going on, like the mind, not even the mind, but just what was going on in Kanye's direct environment and what led to the point that he's at now, and the point that we're all at now. But that's pretty much it with that. The last thing I'll mention about CRS is they all share a unique commonality in their respective legal and label issues. And what I mean by that is, well, let's start with Lupe. Lupe, as you may or may not know, he had a very, very public spat and he had a very substantial headache with Atlantic Records over the release of his third album, I believe, Lasers. And he was more or less shelved by Atlantic Records. And he was basically at a crossroad. He wanted to release a mixtape outside of the label, and he was openly criticizing the label. And that led to an event that had not been seen in hip hop up until that point. So the hacker group, the infamous hacker group, Anonymous, the big homie of big homie hacker groups, they took to Twitter and threatened Atlantic Records for their mistreatment of the Chi-Town MC, and they called for the immediate release of the project, or they would face imminent digital onslaught on the company and its employees, and they gave them 24 hours to do so. 21 hours after the tweet was published, the company went on Twitter and they announced a release date for Lasers, which was at that time, which was crazy, just because of the fact that this was one of the times this is the first time that the hip hop culture had seen one of these conglomerates, one of these label giants back down to a hacker group, which kind of showed how powerful they were. Anonymous went on to put out a statement saying, quote, "At this time, it can be concluded that we have proved our point. We wish music that is educating the masses to keep being released. We will fight for that. Lupe Fiasco, Talib Kweli, Mos Def, Common, and others are the moving force behind conscious rap. This is music that we will fight for." So that was Lupe Fiasco. Kanye West, being Kanye West and going through Kanye West things, we already know what's going on. But one of the more interesting ones was his lawsuit against EMI over verbiage in a contract that pretty much said he was basically signed and had to put out music forever. Like literally, he could not retire from making music. Part of the contract read, Kanye is to, quote, remain actively involved in writing, recording, and producing compositions and major label albums as his principal occupation. And it goes on to state that, quote, at no time during the term will West seek to retire as a songwriter, recording artist, or producer, or take any extended hiatus during which he is not actively pursuing his musical career in the same basic manner as he has pursued such a career to date. Kanye's argument is that a California labor code prevented any contract for personal service to last no more than 7 years. And at the time of that lawsuit against EMI, he was in year 15. So as of January 2020, the two parties, they settled out of court. And that led to, of course, other Kanye West mishaps. And finally, Pharrell, along with Robin Thicke, was sued by the Marvin Gaye estate for what the latter considered an uncredited sample of the 1973 record "Gotta Give It Up." It was what was crazy was there was no direct sample. Well, the defendants, they argued that there was no direct sample, and they weren't sampling a song. They were sampling, or they took inspiration from a sound and a feeling from a genre of music and an era of music. So rather than that one song, it was just that was the sound that was prevalent at that time in the 70s. So they basically appropriated a stylistic approach rather than lifting directly from a song. And that's what they did to That's what they used to create their original work. And of course, as we know, the court, they didn't see it that way, and they awarded Marvin Gaye's estate the victory. And that was the first ruling of its kind in the music industry. And that basically made a lot of people go back and really try to reevaluate how elements of a song could be used to make new records as opposed to directly sampling. We look at a lot of Bruno Mars's work, and we can see that it was inspired a lot by earlier works, but it's not necessarily sampling or ripping from a direct song. So of course that would be something to argue, but it's all very, very complicated stuff. I'm by no means a music expert or analyst, so it was just very interesting to see that. All right, this has been a very long episode. I'll probably even split this into two different episodes to make this a little bit easier to consume. So once again, thank you for sticking with me. This is the first of a two-part series. The second part will be coming out shortly. And in that second part, I'm going to start to talk about the more modern groups. So everything from 2010 and up. And these are going to be some that you may remember more clearly just because they transpired more recently. So as always, definitely reach out to me. Let me know what you think. Any feedback, any criticism, anything you want to recognize, let me know. And I appreciate your listenership. Shout out to you, especially if you made it this far. So once again, my name is Kyle S., and this has been Underground Genius.